Let's say there's some issues in your life you're trying to figure out right now, whatever the case may be, whether it's like you feel overwhelmed, trying to figure out time management, or you have like toxic relationships, trying to figure out relationships in community and things like that, or you're in like poor job or school or environment where you're trying to like figure out a new path or whatever it is, and you're looking for advice. The advice that I would give you is for you to give yourself advice, and I want to introduce the concept of Solomon's paradox. The phrase was coined like 10 years ago or so in a psychological study, but it has to do with like the character Solomon from the Bible, King Solomon, son of David, who's written about in like 1st and 2nd Kings. But the idea is the paradox of Solomon's life is that in the scriptures, Solomon is a great king. He has incredible wealth, he has a peaceful kingdom, and he is incredibly wise. Like people come from all over the place to gain the wisdom of Solomon, and he gives great advice to people. But at the same time, in the midst of Solomon's like general wisdom that he gives out to people, that he dishes out very well, Solomon lives like a very sinful life that's kind of in shambles. Like it says in the scriptures, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And then those wives that he had were from like foreign nations, which was expressly forbidden. And the reason it was forbidden is what happens to Solomon, because those wives convince him to serve other gods. And he builds temples to other gods, and he gives birth to kids who become like terrible rulers after him. So Solomon's personal life stinks. But at the same time, he has incredible wisdom to give other people. So why can't he listen to his own wisdom and live a better life? This is the paradox that we see in his life. Hence the phrase Solomon's paradox. And what that has to do with you is the two findings in the study are that you and I, we are much better for whatever reason at giving advice to other people than we are to ourselves. Like, of course, I can have an opinion on what would be best for you, and I can see things more clearly because I don't have the same like social cognitive bias that you have living your life. From an external perspective, I can look into your life and give you better advice than I might give to myself. Like, I might be like really overwhelmed and have like a terrible relationship issues or whatever the case may be, but I could have a conversation with someone who's experiencing like maybe even the same exact thing and be able to give them advice, but for whatever reason be struggling myself. The second finding that has to do with that is that what they found is that when we can kind of eliminate self-immersion into our own lives and into our own story, like if I was just presented with like a character avatar of an individual who experienced the exact same things as me, then I would be able to give that person good advice. Better than if I were just like sitting here in my own problems, same exact problems, then I wouldn't be able to give myself as good of advice, because we like distance ourselves from like the personal immersion in the situation. So for whatever reason, when we can like whitewash the situation and distance ourselves from our own problems and look at them from a different lens, we can actually give ourselves really good advice and needed advice. So here's basically what I want to propose is if you are finding yourself in a situation where you got problems you're trying to figure out, whatever the case may be, again, if you're like overwhelmed and trying to figure out, I got too many responsibilities, I got like the longest to-do list of all time, and I can't figure out how to approach it. Or if you are like, I got this terrible relationship, or I got this relationship that's like, or this friendship that's not really going the way that I thought it was going to go, and I just don't really know what to do about it. Or you're like, I'm trying to make a decision between a few different jobs or school or whatever it is, and I just don't know what decision to make, is to do this. Write out your life. Like take I don't know, I got a big whiteboard and I love doing this kind of thing. Or you can take like a sheet of paper or type it out somewhere or put it in your notes on your phone, but just write out your life. Just like create a character essentially, and just write down like all the things that are going on in your life in the different categories of like, I don't know, school, finances, relationship, whatever the case may be. And then just like write it all out, map out everything that's going on in your life, and then just like put it off to the side. And then try to put yourself in a place where you like can distance yourself from that being you, and then look at that from a fresh lens and maybe pretend that that's someone else. Like pretend it's maybe a good friend of yours or a family member or someone you really care about. Or say, I don't know, say you pretend you're like a therapist or a counselor or someone who gives life advice, and you're like sitting in your office and that person walks in, and just analyze the situation from an objective point of view and pretend that that's not your situation and give that person advice. And probably what you will find is that you'll be able to figure out like, you'll just start asking the person some questions, because that's what you usually do. Like when someone comes to you and they're looking for advice, and they'll be like, then you can ask them questions that they probably aren't even thinking about for themselves. So once you start to distance yourself from the situation, you can kind of look at it and go like, oh, okay, well, when you're trying to like decide between these two things, and like, well, what are you afraid of? Like, why won't you just say yes to the thing that you want to do? Then you go like, oh, well, of course. Well, that's the reason why. It's because I'm just like afraid of a certain person's opinion or something like that. Or you're like super overwhelmed. You have this long to-do list and you like map out every one of your responsibilities. And like internally, you're like, I can never figure out how to approach all these things because it's just too much. But when you map it all out and you just look at it from kind of a distanced perspective, you can kind of look at things and be like, okay, individual, what are the things that are like occupying the most of your time? What are the things you really enjoy? What are the things you have responsibilities for? And you can start to kind of dissect them in a way that maybe you couldn't do when it was just in your head. But once it's mapped out and you can kind of distance yourself from the situation and look at it from a broader lens, then you can begin to give yourself actually really good and probably necessary advice that was probably in your head, that you probably could have given to someone else, but because it was you were just like so immersed in it that you couldn't see from the perspective that you would be able to with someone else. Hence the idea of Solomon's paradox. So whatever that looks like for you, if you're in that situation right now, I hope that helps, but just take some time, maybe today, like maybe right now, you turn this off and you go and get yourself a whiteboard or a piece of paper or a computer, and you just type out your situation, the details of everything going on in your life. And then step back and say like, if this was my friend, if this is someone walking into the office to have a consultation with me, whatever you want to do, what advice, what questions would I ask? And hopefully that gives you a better perspective and helps you to like be more free. Ultimately, this is the goal, that you can experience more freedom, start to move forward towards the person that you were meant to be.